Horsefly Dress. On behalf of the University of Arizona Press, I want to thank Heather for generously sharing her time with us today. The University of Arizona Press is the premier publisher of academic, regional, and literary works in the state of Arizona. We disseminate ideas and knowledge of lasting value that enrich understanding, inspire curiosity, and enlighten readers. We advance the University of Arizona's mission by connecting scholarship and creative expression to readers worldwide. Founded in 1959, the press is a nonprofit publisher of scholarly and regional books. We publish about 55 books annually and have more than 1,600 books in print. These include scholarly titles in anthropology, archaeology, environmental science, history, indigenous studies, Latinx studies, Latin American studies, and the space sciences, as well as award-winning fiction and poetry series, Suntracks and Camino del Sol. We want to thank our co-host, Fact and Fiction Books in Missoula, Montana, and Birchbark Books in Native Arts in Minneapolis. Today's book can be purchased from Fact and Fiction, Birchbark, and the University of Arizona Press. Links will be posted in the chat. It's my pleasure to introduce Heather Cahoon. Heather earned her MFA in poetry from the University of Montana, where she was the Richard Hugo Scholar. She's received a Potlatch Fund Native Arts Grant and Montana Arts Council Artist Innovation Award. Her chapbook, Elk Thirst, won the Miriam Frontier Prize. She's an assistant professor of Native American Studies at the University of Montana, and she is from the Flathead Reservation and is a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. Welcome, Heather. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to hear you read.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. I want to just start off briefly by thanking the press, so the University of Arizona Press, and also the sponsors. Savannah just mentioned Birchbark Books and Fact and Fiction, and also wanted to thank everybody who showed up. So I'm very excited to read and to visit with you guys. So I'm going to start off by reading the title poem in this book. It's called Horsefly Dress. A long wing feather propels the stunted body of a black-crowned night heron through air, breaking apart the dried mouth of memory. In an outpouring of primordial story, I hear her name, Chattanoogs. The hunting moon unearths Coyote's eldest and only daughter. Her name no longer spoken, she turned to porous stone. But I hear her name, Chattanoogs, along Flathead River near Relive, in the cutting of meat, its crackle drying above smoldering cottonwood. Chattanoogs, at the edge of river, in passing water, the embodiment of belief. She perforates the divide between known and unknown. Here, she reconsiders the archaeology of our suffering. Her mouth opens in the alarm cry of a brown thrasher, a warning, brace for all that's wrapped into a name. So the next poem is called Nkwe, and it means to believe in Salish. Why this repeated sunburst of feathered bodies? Cliff swallow flocks erupt into a sky of lungs and throat, 1,000 dull brown wings frantically folding, releasing, diffusing light, refracting reason, centrifugal forces decentralize until the word is scrambled, unrecognizable, uncomfortable to look at as this history of people, Skylihu, and place, Chilehu, so difficult to understand and to believe.
Thank you. If you're reading this poem on paper, the form is really, really unique. So I wanted to ask you what inspired this particular form for this poem.
You know, I feel like every poem that I write, I always start out just writing with blue ink on paper, and usually the form that sort of the poem spills out onto the page and remains the same. And this is just literally the way that so I can show some of the people at home. I'm not sure how well you can see that. But that's just the way that this poem came out. And there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of, like I say, this history. It's uncomfortable to look at the you know, our settler colonial history in our country. And it's difficult to believe. It's, you know, it's messy. And I feel like the form for this poem is also, it's uncomfortable to look at. It's kind of hard to read because it is so scrambled. But yeah, so that's sort of the origin of the story of that form for that particular poem.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so next I'm going to read Geography of Coyote. Coyote's lithe-limbed body grounds memory, reconciles past with greater past. His dealings are collected and recollected by people as far north as shoe swaps down through dry Dene deserts and into Aztec arms. Coyote is pivotal, a chokecherry seeded to generations to aid survival. We call him Sinchetle. He is married to Mole, and together they have several children, a daughter, beautiful and kind, called Horsefly Dress, and 4 or 5 sons, depending upon the story, the teller, the time of year, their names being, he knows as he lays his head down, lays down straight under a tree or log, excrement in the middle crook of his foot, alternatively sometimes called he defecates on his leg. And then there is the 4th one, Yelchnet Pavastkin, a son, a name unwilling to be translated into English or to conform to any other way of knowing. Last but not least is he washes his feet, the baby. Sinchetle is thick-haired and cunning, strategic, social, and selfish, transformer of our world, redistributor of fire, food, and rights. Through a complex pedagogy of contradiction, he demonstrates right ways of living. To act like Sinchetle is to behave foolishly. To behave foolishly is to take action against oneself. Thus, in Salish, a common root, in Chetlescu.
Thank you. I would love to know more about Coyote's centrality in this collection, and also why you chose Horsefly Dress, his daughter, specifically as the first poem and as the title of the collection, and what her significance is as a whole to you.
Yeah, so it's, I guess it started several years ago. I don't know, 6 or 7, maybe 8 years ago. I just randomly heard about Horsefly Dress, and my whole life up until that moment, I had never heard that Coyote had a daughter. She doesn't appear in a lot of stories. I mean, she's there, but so I became very, very just like interested. Like, he has a daughter. Who is she? Like, where is she in these stories? And just, I was so curious about her. And she sort of became this muse for me, where I started looking for her in the stories. You know, some of our stories are recorded. There was a couple different like ethnohistorians who passed through, and different anthropologists. And so there are some old written documents that have our stories, but some of the stories are still not written down. And so it was over a few years that I had collected and listened to and just sought out, you know, as much about her as I could. And in the process, I learned what the stories are actually about on a different level that I was not able to sort of discern as a younger person. And a main, I guess a main lesson that comes through the stories is about transformation. And there's always moments of death and transformation of a person, multiple different kinds of transformation. And if there's time, I was going to read later tonight about those forms of transformation, metaphorical, metaphysical, all of these ways that primarily through suffering, we can be transformed as humans.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the next poem is called Lichet, and I wrote this one for my older sister. She is a wood warbler hatched into madness. She emerged from milky shell, earthen brown blotches, not rorschach, not robin, but warbler. Open-mouthed swallow of hard chipped notes, calls smothered inside her smoke-gray chamber of throat, disappearing between branches, muted yellow-green tail feathers and body, dainty clawed toes. White lines half circle, her eyes sense, but can't see. At the center of night movements, misfire, misreads the body, responds on its own. So also in this collection, there are a lot of dream poems, and this is one of them. And this was actually a dream that I had. It was my only recurring dream I've ever had in my life, and I used to have it regularly as a little girl. And so I wrote a poem about it. My sister, 2 or 3 years old, is taken by a man on a camel so out of place as he situates her on his lap, then rides off atop the water. She is too young to mind the distance between us increasing as I, only 6 or 7 myself, watched panic from the rocky shoreline of our family's favorite campground on the west side of Flathead Lake. The man taking my sister is wearing a coat of many colors as I imagine Joseph's vertical stripes bright against the backdrop of dark mountains. I need to stop him, to save her, but I can't because even without trying, I know I cannot walk on water. So I'm going to read another dream poem. And this one is titled, A Dream of Black Water. A sun-grayed dock, wood swollen, splintered by heat and rain, stretches to the middle of an expanse of black water. At its end, a wooden shack sits atop a meager floating deck where I stand watching my baby crawl toward me. I glance up to see 2 of my husband's friends walking out towards us when I hear my baby fall into the water, glimpse him disappearing into the darkness. Should I jump in after him? I wonder, panic-laced, my body throat, knowing I will be disoriented, knowing I will lose this perspective from above, where I can pinpoint the exact location I last saw him. I want my husband's friends to come and help, but to direct them to the place he disappeared, but they are too far away. Indecision erodes as I recall that a baby submerged in water will always hold its breath. Peering into the dark water, I make out my son's tiny body facing down, slowly rising toward the surface. He is not frantic, not thrashing, not resisting, caught in calmness. He gradually ascends until he is within arm's reach. I pull him from the water and hold him to me. As I stand up, I look around. Drought has killed everything as far as I can see. On every side of the black lake, stark golden desert unfolds its glistening sand, formed by the wind into endless wave-like hills.
I remember in an earlier interview that we did together, you were talking about how the act of writing about your dreams is often what helps you fully understand them and to see or hear or decode their messages for you. Do you think dreams will always be an integral part of your poetry?
I think so, but I feel like I kind of go through phases where I dream more regularly and more vivid. Um, but like right now, I'm I'm doing a lot of research, and I feel like my dreams are significantly more boring when my mind is like very, thinking about policy and all kinds of stuff like that. Then when I can step away from that and just be present, I feel like then I'm open to having much more interesting and meaningful dreams. So the next poem is actually about the dreams, because most of the dreams often had an element of water in them. So this poem is called The Salish Root Word for Water. Half my life was lived in dreams of water. Nights' long hours immersed me in standing, rushing, churning, falling, frozen water. You're asking to be worthy of something, says my friend. She tells me that the Salish root word for water is su, a verb meaning to ask for permission or information, to make a plea to be worthy. So much is said in this word, sabuku. So the next poem is titled Peregrine Body. Hers, as mine is, a body in conflict, ever caught between flight and fight. I see her despite her silence, solitary among the twisting leaves of choke cherries and nine barks. Her finely barred torso flashes into sight. Her slate gray scapulars lift open. Twice she fly hops among the brambles, then focuses on me. Mutual watchfulness reveals that hers, as mine is, a body in conflict, ever caught between flight and fight. So the next poem is called Meditations on Blue. And I had, over the course of probably 4 years of writing the poems that comprise this collection, just these random little snippets, really short pieces of, just a few lines of poems here and there. And I was reading through them. I didn't want to throw them away. I just saved those things. And I was reading through them at one point and realized that many of them were centered around or inclusive of this theme of blue. And so I put them together, and they're very, very tiny. I don't know how well you can see this, but so it just these little 3 lines on every page. So Meditations on Blue. Open as sky, as belief, my son's eyes as a child before they shifted to earth-grounded hues of tufted hair grass, golden star moss, and devil's club leaves. 6 mountain bluebirds frozen in space, but not time with the help of the wild wind. Against the blonde hillside, they appear as if in a still light, as if I could walk up and pluck one from midair. Fireflies like blue-white micro stars blink on off near my father's house on Post Creek. Quickly, they disappear into the dark mouth of night. An emotion described as in she or he is feeling blue. An idiom incapable of posing the questions cried by those it depicts. If crisis truly carries opportunity, what of the recursive nature of loss? Where is the exit from ruin? Because Kwai, the word for blue, also describes my concepts of black and green, I attempt to reconcile these differing perspectives held captive in a word. In keen self-awareness of other, she, i.e. meaning, is the reckoning found inside irreconcilable, or the irreconcilable inside found reckoning, whichever it is, she, i.e. meaning, sometimes enters the mind from the outside, overstepping the insoluble, the wood-planked borders between meanings, as if one word or idea was or is more or less active in the mouth, the mind, or in protest or pronoun, as if any idea can fit inside the carcass-like casket of label. I read that we categorize to create meaning, therefore it is possible to change meaning by recategorizing. Meaning hovers, a hummingbird moth, or is it the real thing? Which again is it, Trochilidae or Lahni, the buzzing long-beaked seeker of nectar that never seems to alight?
I love the way that you integrate such vivid imagery of nature into all of your poems. Do you find yourself writing when you're out in nature, or do you sort of take it in and then write the poems later?
Both. I feel like when I'm really focused on writing poetry, I will take a little notebook with me on hikes and just listen for things. And I will say that I don't think I have ever been inspired to write a poem just from sitting inside somewhere. It's always based on going outside and being outside and just being present. I feel like when I'm outside, especially removed from people, that it feels like then that form of presence that is triggered by being out in nature, like really, not in a park, but like outside of, cities, and that actually feels to me always like, wow, this is actually the real world. Not this world of human constructs, our societies and all the different things we have going on and our career ladders and our, just like all of these things. So yeah, I feel like I write a lot of poems as a result of being outside. Yeah. So I'm gonna read one more dream poem. And this one is one of my favorite ones because it was such a neat dream. And well, I'll just read it. A dream of a darling boy. Is this boy my father? I wondered later upon waking. He was a boy from home, that much I could recognize, his dark hair, lively eyes, glossy black, a muted smile I could only describe as darling. I am walking with my sister near Dixon, Flathead River to the north, the snow deep, maybe 4 feet. We visit as we walk on an elevated wooden structure, a sidewalk of sorts paralleling the highway. Mid-sentence, I sense someone behind us. Looking back, I see this boy. He appears to be 3 or 4 years old. He is bashful. He is shirtless, shoeless, has no jacket, clothed only in a pastel yellow short suit, a romper, thin straps stemming from waistband up over bare shoulders, back down to opposite waistband and back. Why is he all alone? It is winter, why is he not properly dressed? And why does he not seem to mind the cold? I wonder as I glance down at his feet, frostbitten, freezer-burned flesh dry, and cracking each toe, the whole foot and ankles, eating its way up his small legs. He smiles at me, but keeps a safe distance. This little boy who earlier I described as darling, who, on second thought, is more accurately described as daring, Qĺispé, he dares to be. So the next one is called Baby Out of Open Woman. And it references a part of one of our oldest stories. And now is not actually our season for telling stories. We bring our stories out when there's snow on the ground, when it's winter. But just with this story, just referencing, or this poem referencing elements of the story, I feel comfortable sharing it in public. Baby out of cut open woman, so called because he was squelched to lineage, cut out of the stomach as an infant. Indeed, he survived the unbelievable, a lucky break, to become the only living member of his immediate family. Another lucky break, he won his race against the cold birds, earning the right to make a law that they could no longer control all the weather, ending the age of ice. Next, he gathered his family's bones, their marrowed ribs, their marrowed limbs, each rib, forearm, and finger. Covering them with his blanket, he jumped over 4 times, bringing them, each one, back to life. These are the stories that belong here, that pushed up through this soil, unfurling as arrow-leafed balsam root leaves and boulders found in unusual places. How else does a thing enter this world, now so changed we struggle to hear the shapes of a language that no longer fits every ear? Each story, word fragment moves over hills, the highest reaches of trees without catching in memory, but the crispness of Sinlaki, of Quillansutin, like fire, crackle, the flick of sound, a body remembers. So the next poem is called Meta. And I referenced it earlier at the beginning of the reading, and this will be the last poem, but it talks about Coyote and his decision to leave certain evils or ailments or challenges here for us, and what happens as a result of us encountering those things that provoke those major challenges for us in our lives. Meta, transformation always and in everything, as in even false hellebore recognizes the convertibility of all phenomena, the recasting of one thing into another, as in Spokane became the sun, as in Coyote is a man born. He suffers an endless series of deaths, some metaphorical, some metaphysical, each one metamorphic.
Thank you so much. Truly incredible.
Oh, thank you.
So if everyone in the audience, if you have any questions, please put them in chat and I will be sure to ask Heather your questions. Madi is asking, why do you write in blue ink?
I just only write in blue ink. And then I don't know, and I only write on lined paper. And I like those, like, well, I happen to have multiple of them. These like dollar notebooks. I like the width of the lines, and I like that they're flexible, and that's what I write in. I just write my poems in that, and I always write in blue ink, and I never write in black ink if I can help it. Because it's a superstition or something, I don't know.
Karen Richards is asking, is it hard for you to relive your poems?
You know, I think it was, in the beginning, it was hard to write about certain experiences that were very challenging to me. But I feel like through writing about it, you actually are given an opportunity to understand the impacts that situation or instance has had on you. You're able to process some of that. And so I think it's actually kind of a therapeutic way of sort of processing your grief. Yeah, so it's not, I mean, I actually did a reading where my sister was there and she started crying. And when I saw her crying, I just felt like it was hard not to cry. But normally it isn't. It was just, that.
Okay. Keetja Kuipers is asking, so at what point does form enter your process?
I think in the very beginning. Like I said a few minutes back, the form that the poem sort of puts itself on as I'm writing it is usually the form that it stays in. There are actually 2 poems in Horsefly Dress whose form I could just not find. One of them was Ode to Pelia, Every Mother, and that's Mole, Coyote's wife. And that poem has been in every shape you could imagine, and it never has felt settled, but because of like publication deadlines, it looks how it does, because that was its most recent iteration. And the other poem was called Mist and Lou, that I couldn't find the form that poem needed to be in, so it's just in its latest iteration also.
Rin Freeman is asking, how is the oral tradition of not telling stories out of season, such as told when it's not winter, negotiated as a written form?
Well, I think, there a lot of tribes have actually had to face that question. Should they break tradition and record their stories so that future generations have them? Not everybody has an opportunity to hear their stories, and certainly not all of them. So I think that, each tribe, a lot of the tribes have culture committees that take on questions like that. And the culture committee for my tribe on our reservation, the Sélish and Qĺispé culture committee, actually collects those stories and collects other ones from elders and writes those down, and so that we can have access to them. They recently, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, wrote down for what I believe is the first time, like an extensive part of our creation story. So, but it hadn't been written until then. So yeah, it's, every tribe has to determine, if they're gonna have their stories, their oral traditions transcribed into becoming written traditions.
Okay. Someone with the initials RHM is asking, could you talk about the use of Salish as it relates to place and sovereignty? Your poems connect body and land so beautifully.
Oh, thank you. That's a really good question, because part of the reason, so I don't speak Salish. I can say multiple words and some prayers and, just a bit of Salish. And, but one of the reasons that I wanted to put Salish into these poems whenever it came up, was to sort of reclaim that space in the conversation. And I was working with your press, whether or not because originally any non-English word is italicized to indicate that it's a foreign word. And so very intentionally in this book, none of the Salish is italicized because it's original language. It's not a foreign language. And so, so part of that question, like how does that prevalence or use of the Salish language in the poems relate to tribal sovereignty? And I think that there is a connection in that through using that actually is a way of supporting and asserting tribal sovereignty, to say this space, this place has been inhabited by Sélish and Qĺispé people for literally thousands of years. And these are the words that were heard here for thousands and thousands of years. And I think that links to sovereignty through just asserting and reclaiming space, metaphorical, but also, physical space. So.
I'm so sorry, I was muted because my dog is barking. Martita Alba is asking, I love the way birds move in your poems. Does a bird enter your poem along the way, or does the bird sometimes begin a poem for you?
I think that both. I'll be out just walking or hiking, and I'll have this encounter with a bird that is like out of the ordinary. Like these very memorable sort of, I guess, interactions with the birds, where they either come like very, very close to me, or they're just so beautiful and they're striking, and that there's this pause and sort of, I just think that birds are amazing. And I just love, I love how they look. I love how they sound. I love that they navigate between space, in the physical plane, between, Terra and this celestial space. So I think, yeah, both. I'll see a bird and it will trigger a poem, or I'm working on a poem and the bird works its way in there.
Does anyone have any other questions? I'm not seeing any yet. Give it a second. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming to our virtual book release celebration for Horsefly Dress.
Thank you.
It was incredible to hear you read in person, in a sense. It's so beautiful. Your poems are just absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you.
And we're so grateful for your time today. We also want to thank our co-hosts again, Fact and Fiction Books and Birchbark Books, and be sure to look in the chat for more information on purchasing Horsefly Dress from these wonderful independent bookstores. Really want to support our indies. On behalf of the University of Arizona Press, thank you so much for coming to the program today.
Thank you. Have a lovely evening, everyone.